Morning guys, Meredith here with Madam Diesel. Today we're going to talk about how not maintaining this can end up with your engine in my shop like this. Now ironically enough, I was actually thinking about doing a coolant video, and sure enough today's project ended up with the exact consequences of, either using the wrong coolant or not maintaining the coolant they had. And today I'm talking about a Cummins 6BT. This is a 4BT that happens to be in my shop. But the twin engines I checked out today both have evidence of liner failure, very premature liner failure with only 2,000 hours or so because the coolant wasn't maintained. Now the actual complaint was loss of power on their trip while they were returning from Gig Harbor. So these are twin 6BT Cummins, and the actual problem we found right away, they were the primary and secondary fuel filters. They were just clogged to the gills. And so we fixed that problem right away. Engines then ran just fine. However, afterwards, I took a look, just a general inspection, and I discovered the condition of the coolant, and it had metal in it. Now this particular engine might be in my shop for a whole different reason. However, it's a good example to be able to show you what I'm talking about. And I do want to double check with the owner before, I film him or his engine. I don't want to shame anyone. That's not what this YouTube is about. But I did manage to bring a sample of some of the coolant that came out of the header tank on the front of the engine home, because there's a couple things I want to check. And one of those things is the water pump might be coming apart or the liners might be coming apart. So I want to see if the metal that I'm seeing in the coolant is aluminum, which is non-magnetic, or if it's liner or block material, which is magnetic. And if it is liner or block material, the engine's going to have to come apart to fix that issue. Now, when I'm talking about engines with cylinder liners, particularly wet liners, I'm talking about engines with a removable cylinder liner that's surrounded by coolant. So this particular liner, this is out of 671 Detroit diesel. It is not a wet liner. It has holes because it's a two-stroke, but the Cummins liners, I don't have one to show you guys. So imagine this liner doesn't have these big holes in it. A Cummins liner is very, very similar looking, and it is surrounded by coolant to help keep it cool while the engine's running, and that cavitation action is what will eat away at this liner over time. So it's certainly something those of us with like a Cummins engine or similar, anything with a wet liner, have to pay attention to is what type of coolant we use and what that SCA additive level is at all times so we don't have a rebuild on our hands. There's other engines that use, cylinder liners like Yanmar. This is a Kubota liner, and these are called dry liners. So they still have replaceable liners, which is nice for rebuilding. However, this liner has no coolant touching it. So I don't have to use an SCA additive on this particular liner. So it's kind of nice, just one less thing to pay attention to on the smaller engines. But if you have a wet liner engine, it's certainly something you want to pay attention to, because if you don't maintain them, you're going to have problems. A lot of Caterpillar, newer Detroits, like the Daimler Detroits, Cummins, those types of engines, you're going to find wet liners on with multiple O-rings around the liner to keep the coolant from getting into your oil system. And then everybody's going to be running a coolant that's pre-charged with like an SCA additive, such as like Fleet Guard or something, to protect that liner during the engine's operation. So back to the coolant sample that I actually pulled from the port 6BT. I'm going to grab my flashlight here, and you can actually see quite a oily sheen on the coolant. That's something I'm concerned about, but I'm also really concerned about this metal that you're seeing. And I'll zoom in here, and you'll be able to see it a lot clearer. Now, during my inspection, I opened up the coolant reservoir, the actual header tank on the engine, and with my headlamp, I could see like mounds of metal that were piling up against the back side of that reservoir. And so we were able to use a turkey baster, and luckily they had this clean container, so I was able to kind of baste some of this up and bring it home with me so you can actually see the metal. Now, this is a very small amount of metal. The amount that was actually in the header tank was really obvious and significant. Now, my plan for this is to actually send out a sample, but first, before we do that, I want to take a magnet to this and see if it's actually aluminum or iron, because that will give me an idea of where this metal is coming from, whether it's the water pump or whether it's cylinder liners or block material. And it looks like it is magnetic. I'll get it zoomed in here in a second. You'll be able to see it really clearly. So that's not a good thing, unfortunately. The only way to fix that is to tear the entire engine apart, and we can't do that inside the boat. That means the engine's going to have to come out. He's a power boat, so most likely it's going to be a yard project. So I've got my coolant sample kit from NC Machinery. We'll get this poured in and ready to send out to actually see. Hopefully they can test what the metal actually is, and they can also test what that sheen is. I'm guessing it's oil to a degree, maybe some carbon, I don't know. And that way I can give my customer a much more kind of definitive answer. I'm not able to fit it all in one sample kit, so we're actually going to fill up a second sample kit. And I'm really trying to get as much of the metal debris that I brought home with me in this second kit. And I'll mark one that has the metal in it, and the other one they can test for just general contaminants. That way I'll have a good idea of what's going on. This guy's a Cummins 4BT, which is the same thing as our 6BT. And what I'm talking about here is the cylinder liners. And these liners are removable inserts. And when I refer to wet liners, see how there's coolant around these liner walls? You can actually see the liner wall straight in there. And these are newer liners, so, this particular engine doesn't have, any significant cavitation or anything. But you can actually see the liner inserts all the way down. I don't know if I can get you a better view. Sorry, guys. But I can see the base of the liner down in there. And these liners are surrounded by coolant. See that liner in the upper left kind of corner? That's where it seals off. There's an O-ring that surrounds that and keeps everything sealed. Well, what happens is as this engine's running, pistons going up and down, they're going to create micro vibrations in the coolant, and that's called cavitation. And cavitation chips away at that liner material down in there. And if you're running the wrong coolant without an SCA additive, you're going to literally wear away that material until you get a hole in your cylinder. Now, I've seen this a lot where it's already too late. You've already got a hole and it's really obvious. However, the engine we're looking at, there's no evidence of oil mixing with the coolant or coolant mixing with the oil yet. In fact, the oil sample on the engine did indicate that there was trace water in the oil. So I know there was a problem a while back. However, we're not seeing it in terms of milky oil. Where I'm seeing it is I've got magnetic liner material that I'm going to confirm by sending out, that sample telling me this liner is wearing away. So when I'm talking about coolant test strips, I'm talking test strips like this. And these test strips are going to test like freeze point, whether the coolant's becoming acidic or not, stuff like that. And so when you have coolants that have like SCA additives, normally when you service the engine or the truck or whatever, you want to test the coolant. So we'll test this coolant coming out and see what it looks like prior to sending it out, because I don't know if I'll be able to, get another sample soon. We'll make sure our coolant is dunked in there. And then we'll let this sit for a moment. Make sure we don't spill our coolant test strip here. I'd be so mad if I spilled this. And this, I think they want you to wait about 30 seconds or so. I'm going to be sending 2 coolant samples out of this coolant. One, I want them to test for the sheen, and then the other one was kind of the very bottom of the coolant where I was actually able to get some metal in it. And hopefully they can test the metal and tell me if it's liner material. So they give us, color coding right here. Tell us, like our glycol, our freeze point. So in this case, this coolant, 30% about, maybe 40%. And that tells us kind of whether it's 50-50. And then this guy is kind of how we determine how much SCA additive is still in and whether more needs to be added. And so it gets lighter and lighter based on, how much you have. And in this case, there's like nothing showing up. And so the bottom here, I gotta get my glasses. Okay, so we've got 0 parts per million. That's the middle pad. That's the lightest. Pretty much white. And then the end pad, it's pretty dark. So the fact that it's white, it tells me we got what looks like 0. So we've got nothing, which isn't good. And so even though they have a coolant that says it treats cavitation, it doesn't treat cavitation. It doesn't either. They haven't added anything to it for quite some time, or they, like they're using the wrong type of coolant, and that's why these liners are degrading the way they are. I personally usually see liner failure once the coolant and oil are already mixing. I've never seen it this early where I see metal in the reservoir. So that's pretty interesting. Now, what I'm referring to when I refer to coolants that have like an SCA additive in it is something like this. These extended life coolants advertise that they come pre-charged with that SCA additive. So the customer was using Xerox. It is, it does say it's good for Cummins. And if you read the back, it does actually say, let's see, Yeah, it says that, you know, it protects against cavitation. So on the back of here, you know, it's telling me that there's an SCA additive. Now, I saw they had the red extended life stuff, not the yellow stuff, but, you know, the brand name was Xerox. I did read it on the back of the bottle. And that also goes for the actual Fleet Guard. Normally, I run Fleet Guard because that's, you know, actually a company that makes stuff for Cummins. It's all Cummins approved. And this, I do know, is pre-charged with, you know, the SCA additive. It does say it back here. But these coolants need to be maintained. And so just because I filled my engine up with, you know, Fleet Guard or Xerox or whatever type of pre-charged coolant doesn't mean it's good forever. It does say it's a 1,000,000-mile coolant, and that's great, but I may need to add more SCA additive over time. So for example, like on your pickup truck, on your boat, anything with an engine that has wet liners in it, liners that are surrounded by coolant, you're going to want to use those test strips, and when the SCA level starts to get lower, then you can buy a small bottle of the additive and just add it in. What that SCA does is it creates like a coating on the metals in the cooling system. So like the liner, it will create a layer that's sacrificial, and the cavitation action can chip away at that layer instead of the actual metal. If that's not kept up, that's when you start seeing metal being chipped away like what we're seeing with this engine. Well, what started out as a simple diagnostic for low power turned into something way worse. Now we're still kind of in the assessment phase. Unfortunately, I've had to give the owner the bad news, so he's kind of figuring out, you know, what to do with that information. In the meantime, I'm going to send this sample out, and I will certainly update you guys on the findings and the repair. I want to get his permission before I film anything on his boat first, and I will let you guys know how it goes. I hope you guys learned something in this video today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will plan on seeing you guys in the next one.